Even though there's much understandable doom and gloom about the state of the games industry right now, the 2020s have still been an absolute embarrassment of riches for good video games. However, the sheer abundance of games, both big and small, releasing every single week does mean that rarely more than a few days go by without a game of some kind getting embroiled in some sort of controversy. And with that in mind, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are the most controversial games of the 2020s so far. Being a gaming fan with so many different platforms, consoles, and services to juggle can be a right nightmare. But whether you're worried about the security of your personal information after signing up to all of these providers, or fall victim to wanting to watch that gaming film or TV show only to find that it's not available in your region, seriously, why can't I get the 2006 Silent Hill film anywhere in the UK? It is so underrated. Norton VPN is here to lend a hand with an offer that'll solve these problems and more. Scan the QR code on screen or use the link in the description and you can get 54% off your first year's subscription, working out to as little as $4.17 per month, or £2.50 if you're stuck in the rainy UK like me. Again, that's less than $5 per month to watch the stuff that you love and look after your privacy while you do it. And if you decide you don't want to keep going, Norton has a 60-day money-back guarantee as well, so thanks again to Norton for sponsoring this video. I'm now going to use this service to go and watch the good Silent Hill film. First up, Grand Theft Auto: The Trilogy Definitive Edition. A remaster compilation of Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City, and San Andreas should have been a can't-miss slam dunk for Rockstar, and yet this so-called Definitive Edition was an absolute disaster on launch. The remaster trilogy released packed to the gills with bugs, resulting in some missions being downright broken, while many felt that the technical improvements actually made the game look demonstrably worse, noticeably in the greater draw distance and refined lighting erasing the original grungier aesthetic. Then there's the fact that even something as basic as rain effects looked absolutely hideous, suggesting that Rockstar got developers Grove Street Games to throw this dubious remaster together as quickly and as cheaply as possible. The furor wouldn't have been nearly as dramatic if we weren't dealing with Rockstar though, and three of the most beloved games of the PS2 era. Games which many understandably felt deserved a far more reverent treatment than this cynical cash-in. Though post-release updates did whip the collection into finer shape, it's still embarrassing that Rockstar had such little regard for their own legacy to deem the sloppy launch product fit for sale in the first place. Though in their slight defense, I suppose, it's still sold by the truckload, so maybe they're the geniuses after all. Next up, 12 Minutes. This indie time loop thriller was hardly a game most were expecting to be an especially contentious launch upon release, but that all changed once reviews dropped and players got their own hands on it. See, 12 Minutes is set almost entirely inside a small apartment as the player repeatedly plays through a 12-minute home invasion sequence in order to solve a wider mystery. But then comes the big twist, that the central husband and wife characters are actually unknowingly half-siblings, made all the worse by the fact that the wife is pregnant with the man's child. Now, it's absolutely possible for video games to broach subjects as tricky as incest, though it surely requires a more nimble, tactful approach than the one deployed here, where many felt it was just played for mere shock value. It didn't help that the game was more broadly criticised for its clumsy handling of other difficult themes, such as abuse and trauma as well, and so while some appreciated the bold swing, others felt that 12 Minutes totally missed the mark and just fell flat on its face. Next up, Dragon Age: The Veilguard. Though broadly well received by critics upon release, myself included, Dragon Age: The Veilguard proved considerably more contentious with general players, the game effectively becoming a battleground of conflicting opinion. Many felt that the Veilguard simply strayed too far from the gameplay style of previous Dragon Age games, with a more action-orientated bent which streamlined the strategic elements to its detriment, all while its generic repetitive quests were very obviously ported over from the original live service version of the game. Elsewhere, the more light-hearted, high fantasy tone took some by surprise, as well as the abundance of quip-heavy dialogue all throughout. All in all, the Veilguard was a far shallower, more inconsistent experience than previous Dragon Age games, arguably even the second one. And even most who enjoyed it surely appreciated that it didn't live up to a full decade's worth of anticipation. Was it terrible? No, but to see a legendary RPG franchise trot out something that was just fine was kind of heartbreaking in its own right. Next up, Schedule 1. This viral indie hit dropped last year and was an open-world crime simulator where players took control of a drug dealer as they grow and manufacture various illicit substances to help build their criminal empire. And while the premise was provocative enough to raise some eyebrows and cause the game to be unavailable in Australia for over 2 months, that actually isn't the chief reason that the game courted so much controversy. Rather, Movie Games SA, the publisher of 2020's Drug Dealer Simulator, began investigating a potential case of copyright infringement against this game due to its similar gameplay style and interface. This prompted incensed fans to review bomb both Drug Dealer Simulator games, even though Movie Games SA hadn't initiated any form of legal action against this title's small team, and still hasn't as of early 2026. Ultimately, the furor only boosted the game's profile, with it currently sitting at almost 175,000 reviews that skew overwhelmingly positive, while grossing an estimated $125 million in revenue. Up next, Cyberpunk 2077. There's no denying that, being the ambitious brainchild of the Witcher developers CD Projekt Red, Cyberpunk was one of the most anticipated video games ever made. The marketing made it look absolutely incredible, and even though it suffered through numerous delays and reports emerged of its troubled, crunch-filled development, the general expectation was that the final game would be another masterpiece from the studio. But Cyberpunk 2077's launch was, to be kind, an abject disaster, especially on last-gen consoles where bugs and performance issues rendered it close to unplayable for many. Worse still, CD Projekt Red didn't release any pre-launch gameplay footage of the game running on PS4 or Xbox One, and only provided PC review codes to the press, making it clear that they knew precisely what was up and peddled a broken product regardless. The backlash was significant enough that Sony even took the drastic step of removing the game from the PlayStation Store for 6 whole months until it was in a better state. Some disgruntled players meanwhile filed a class action lawsuit against CD Projekt Red for concealing the state of the console versions, resulting in $1.85 million being paid out. Cyberpunk 2077 was eventually patched into good shape across all platforms and has now sold more than 35 million units, though it remains a stinging reminder that assuming your favourite developers can do no wrong is a foolish stance to take. Up next, Palworld. When it launched in early access in January 2024, Palworld was commonly referred to by players and journalists alike as Pokemon with guns. But this amusing nickname also sparked a wider discussion about where the lines between parody, homage, and plagiarism actually lie. The design similarities between some of the pals and various Pokemon led some to believe that developer Pocket Pair had straight up lifted a few of them wholesale from Pokemon. Though Pocket Pair denied any wrongdoing, the ever IP-protective Nintendo issued a statement indicating they would investigate the matter. And in September 2024, Nintendo and the Pokemon Company filed a patent infringement lawsuit against Pocket Pair. At the time of press, the lawsuit is still ongoing, while the court of public opinion remains firmly split, some dismissing Palworld as an obvious Pokemon ripoff, while others feel that it differs enough tonally and gameplay-wise. And all of this is even without getting into the existential controversy about being able to put your pals as slaves for in-game labor, such as crafting weapons, which is just a whole other can of bovril. Next up, Atomic Heart. Atomic Heart is an extremely cool looking game which also became a massive controversy magnet in record time. There was a major backlash over Russian-founded developer Mundfish, namely their refusal to speak out against the Russian invasion of Ukraine or offer any sort of statement on the matter. Instead, the developers opted to quietly downplay mentions of Russia in their corporate literature. This led to criticism from the Ukrainian Ministry of Digital Transformation, which opined that Atomic Heart, quote, romanticizes communist ideology and the Soviet Union, end quote. And even the game's February 21st release date drew criticism for coinciding with the first anniversary of the Ukraine invasion. Mundfish later called itself a neutral party that doesn't comment on politics or religion, a stance which many further criticized as just being a cop-out. Elsewhere, Atomic Heart also caught flack for featuring a racist caricature in one of the cartoons that can be watched in-game, which was later removed. And of course, who can forget all of the fuss that was made about the game's incredibly horny fridge. Ultimately, none of this, not even a threat to boycott the game due to its murky politics, prevented Atomic Heart from selling more than 10 million units, enough that a sequel is already deep in development. Next up, horses. No video game in 2025 proved more controversial than Horses, a horror-themed walking simulator in which a young man lives on a farm populated by enslaved humans dressed as horses. Shortly before the game's December release, the developers revealed that Steam and Epic had both refused to host it on their storefronts, leaving players to acquire it from smaller independent platforms like GOG. Valve ultimately reasoned that they refused to host Horses because it featured sexual conduct involving a minor. And while the game is certainly centered around sexual assault, there's absolutely no explicit sexual content involving children in the game. Valve nevertheless upheld the ban, prompting many to criticize them and other storefronts for refusing to sell an artistically left-field, distinctly adult game about a serious, difficult subject. Still, with so much attention on Horses' apparently transgressive content, it was ultimately able to sell enough to pay off the studio's debts, though the studio understandably lamented being denied access to a market as massive as Steam. Next up, Star Citizen. This is an outlier on this list given that it's the only game here that actually hasn't been properly released yet, but that's precisely why we have it. Star Citizen, if you don't know, is a multiplayer space trading and combat sim which was announced all the way back in 2012 and originally intended to launch in 2014. 12 years later, however, the main multiplayer component remains in early access, and its single-player mode, Squadron 42, still isn't out, with the game's scope continually growing alongside its mind-bogglingly massive crowd-funded budget. At the time of recording, Star Citizen is expected to cross the $1 billion crowdfunding mark this summer, and despite large swaths of players openly dismissing the game as a scam given the ever-delayed release, 2025 was actually its biggest funding year ever, amassing an eye-watering $155 million alone. Many grew frustrated years ago with director Chris Roberts' refusal to simply ship a 1.0 version of the game, feeling that it's probably destined to remain in embryonic early access forevermore, a result of biblical levels of scope creep and mismanagement. I mean, just go and look at developer Cloud Imperium Games' Glassdoor page. The staff reviews do not paint a pretty picture. Above all else, even if the game meets Roberts' recent estimate of a 2027 or 2028 release, there's virtually no chance of it living up to over 15 years of hype. Expect a chorus of "that's it" from casual players, even if it actually ends up being pretty good. Next up, 6 Days in Fallujah. 6 Days in Fallujah was a military shooter first announced way back in 2009 and sparked immediate controversy for being centered around the Iraq War from the American perspective. Beyond the obvious tastelessness of producing glossy entertainment based on ripped from the headlines pain and suffering, and from this perspective no less, there's also the fact that the Iraq War was still ongoing in 2009, which made it seem especially tacky and tasteless. Original developer Atomic Games ultimately went bankrupt in 2011, seemingly ending development. But in 2021, it was unexpectedly resurrected by Highwire Games and released in early access in June 2023. Though this reworked version of the game clearly attempted to address the controversy by including a campaign from the Iraqi side, many were still opposed to its release as a work of apparent US propaganda. The Council on American Islamic Relations even calling for Sony, Microsoft, and Valve to ban it from their storefronts. Ultimately though, the biggest surprise is that 6 days in Fallujah's early access release barely registered a blip. I mean, did you guys even know you could play the game right now? Those few who bothered to review it largely dismissing it as a generic, forgettable military sim. Up next, Diablo Immortal. Few games in recent memory have faced more vitriol because they weren't the game that fans were expecting than Diablo Immortal. Before BlizzCon 2018, it was revealed that some exciting new Diablo news was on the way, naturally leading many to believe that the long-awaited Diablo 4 would finally be revealed. Instead, it turned out to be a rather naff-looking mobile game, Diablo Immortal, which naturally caused the fanbase to melt down both online and at BlizzCon itself. During a Q&A, one attendee grilled principal game designer Wyatt Cheng about the game, to which they replied, "Do you guys not have phones?" Which certainly didn't go down well with anyone and swiftly became a meme. Given that Diablo is a traditionally PC-centric franchise, a mobile-led title simply wasn't what anyone wanted. And to make matters worse, it launched rife with aggressive microtransaction nonsense when it did eventually come out. This resulted in Immortal becoming the lowest user-rated game on Metacritic at the time of its 2022 release, denting Blizzard's favour with fans until Diablo 4 was finally released the next year. Next up, Overwatch 2. Of course, Blizzard strikes again. Let's do these back to back. Overwatch was such a stupendous release that it was simply accepted that the much anticipated sequel would be as successful all over again. Well, you know what they say, lightning doesn't strike twice, I guess. That's because Blizzard made many fans angry when they announced that the sequel would be replacing the original game entirely, meaning that Overwatch's servers were shut down the day before Overwatch 2 launched in early access. It didn't help at all that a large subset of players found Overwatch 2 to be hugely inferior to its predecessor, citing the shift from 6v6 to 5v5 matches as unnecessary, the excessive monetization of its free-to-play model, and lack of quality updates in the months following release. Furthermore, a planned and long-hyped PvE mode was scrapped in order to just focus on competitive PvP, which only further made it feel like Blizzard had lost control of their sequel and led many to question the point of it entirely. Though Overwatch 2 still rocks concurrent play counts of over 30,000 people on Steam, it also sits at mostly negative reviews on the platform, underlining just how much ground the franchise has lost with the wider gaming sphere. Next up, Boyfriend Dungeon. Boyfriend Dungeon is a dungeon-crawling dating sim released in 2021, in which players battle monsters while dating people who have the ability to transform into sentient weapons. Why the hell not? The game was broadly well received by critics upon launch, though swiftly received backlash for a content warning which some players felt was inadequate for informing players of the story's more triggering topics, especially stalking and abuse. Developer Kit Fox Games apologized and revised the content warning to be more descriptive, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. Some fans continually harassed Kit Fox to remove the Stalker storyline entirely, which they did not, and Alexander Gross, who voices the game's primary antagonist Eric, was subjected to a fan harassment campaign simply for the act of playing a despicable character. All in all, the discourse around Boyfriend Dungeon's content ended up overshadowing the fact that it is a bold, well-written game. Up next, War Thunder. Of all the games you'd expect to rustle some feathers, the hugely popular vehicular combat game War Thunder just isn't one of them. However, it found itself in some rather unique hot water when, in the early 2020s, players began posting classified documents to the game's official forums. While discussing the accuracy of some of the aircraft and tanks featured in the title, players have periodically posted restricted military and defense documents to support their case, which, due to their illegality, have been promptly removed by the forum's mod team. Though this information is often posted in an attempt to persuade developer Gaijin Entertainment to take their vehicles and make them more accurate, the irony is that doing so means they never can, because they can't implement design specs in the game that were obtained through illicit means. That's literally tantamount to treason. As of 2026, there have been more than 15 major classified leaks posted on the War Thunder forums, and while the developers certainly see the funny side of it, they also quite understandably want to distance themselves from any illegal activity done in their name. Up next, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. For many years, the Call of Duty franchise seemed pretty much impeachable, that Activision could simply release their competent bread-and-butter first-person shooters every single year and score solid reviews and sales. But the wheels well and truly came off the Enterprise with 2023's Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, which proved to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Suspiciously announced just 3 months before it came out, Modern Warfare 3 was ultimately panned for its lackluster campaign pieced together from pieces of Warzone, and the general feeling that the game was rushed out to meet its release date. Reports subsequently emerged that Modern Warfare 3 was originally intended to be an expansion pack for Modern Warfare 2, which probably explains why its multiplayer suite was made up of entirely remastered maps from the original Modern Warfare 2. It's kind of right there in front of you. Before Activision made a late pivot to a full-fat retail release, the expected value of which it certainly didn't meet. Though it still sold a whole ton of copies, sales were massively down on the previous game, reflecting the overall sentiment that this was the first annual Call of Duty release that didn't justify itself in even the most basic way. And after the disaster that was Black Ops 7 and reports that sales of the franchise are down 60% year on year, it's not looking good for Call of Duty. Next up, Super Seducer 3. Super Seducer is an FMV seduction simulator franchise in which players are guided through a series of dates by an apparent pickup artist in the hopes of luring said dates into bed. First time hearing of this. It's all pure sleaze, and so it's little surprise that the series has found little support from critics. The first 2 games were released on Steam, though the third made headlines in 2021 when Steam refused to put it on their platform, citing its inclusion of, quote, sexually explicit images of real people. Though this led some to believe that Super Seducer 3 featured nudity unlike the first 2 games, this actually wasn't the case at all. Instead, it appeared that Valve decided the threequel's parade of scantily clad women crossed their content guidelines, some citing the possibility that Valve didn't want to deal with the legal headache of verifying the ages of the women depicted in the live-action videos. While sympathy for the game was in short supply considering its leering subject matter, many nevertheless saw it as a wider example of Valve's vague, unclear guidelines over what is and isn't acceptable to release on their platform. Next up, Ready or Not. Originally launched for PC in 2023, the tactical first-person shooter Ready or Not finally landed on consoles in May of 2025, where it immediately got caught up in a censorship debate due to developer Void Interactive announcing that the game's edgier content had to be curtailed for console certification. Dismemberment and nudity both had to be toned down for the game to be approved for release on consoles. Though to make the process of updating the game across platforms simpler, Void also applied these changes to the PC version as well. This caused the game to be review bombed on Steam as players angrily bleated about censorship, while Void maintained that the changes were small and had no noticeable impact on the tone or atmosphere of Ready or Not. Still, this didn't stop it quickly becoming the most pre-ordered game on the PlayStation Store, and within an hour of the changes being rolled out to the Windows version, a mod called Uncensored or Not was released which allowed players to restore the cut imagery. Ultimately then, it was a whole lot of hot air about not very much in the grand scheme of things, especially amid the more controversial conversation over whether Ready or Not is shameless propaganda. Next up, The Day Before. And now, for a game that definitely wasn't ready, we have The Day Before. The post-apocalyptic multiplayer survival game was first announced in 2021, with some admittedly impressive gameplay footage helping it become Steam's most wishlisted game by May 2022. However, many question whether little-known developer Fantastic truly had the chops to deliver the experience that they seemed to be promising. And as time passed without the developers clarifying precisely what The Day Before was, skepticism reached a fever pitch. Would it be an outright scam or merely a dud that overpromised and underdelivered? Well, we finally got an answer in December of 2023, when the day before's early access launch was panned into the Earth's core by critics and players alike for its technical issues, lack of content, and general failure to deliver the advertised game. The blowback was vitriolic enough that within 4 days of release, Fantastic removed the day before from Steam, while publisher Mytona refunded all customers, and Fantastic closed down a short while later. Former developers of the game also went on to accuse the studio brass of mismanaging the production, namely constantly pivoting aspects of the gameplay to chase whatever was trendy at the time. The lesson here then? Well, if a game looks too good to be true, it probably is. Next up, Stellar Blade. 2024's acclaimed action game Stellar Blade became a lightning rod pre-release for the ongoing debate about sexualized designs of female characters in games, given that protagonist Eve sports a voluptuous figure and spends the game kitted out in a figure-hugging outfit. Director Kim Hyung-tae ultimately defended the game's meme-worthy focus on Eve's behind in particular, claiming that because players spend most of the game looking at Eve from the back, he wanted to make the view appealing. On the one hand, some felt that Eve was yet another misogynistic product of a predominantly male development team, a relic of a bygone era where developers assumed every single person playing was an unrelentingly horny teenage boy. Others, however, argued that Eve was an empowering character, while some felt that Eve's sexy appearance was a well-earned throwback to the PS360 era of character action games, and also a riposte to the downturn of sexualized characters in mainstream video games. Whichever side of the argument you fall down on, or perhaps you just don't care either way, it's safe to say that the discourse about Eve and her jiggle physics was interrogated far more intently than anything else in the game. And finally, The Last of Us Part 2. Here we go. No video game this decade has proven as globally controversial as The Last of Us Part 2. The trouble for the long-awaited sequel began roughly 2 months before release, when gameplay footage leaked online revealing that, big spoiler alert, Joel was killed early on in the game. Though many naturally avoided the leaks, this merely lit the spark for a firecracker of outrage, which violently exploded when the game released in June 2020. Joel's early death and Naughty Dog's decision to have players take control of his killer, Abby, for roughly half of the game left some fans furious, while other players respected the bold storytelling choices and incisive commentary on the futility of revenge. The polarizing nature of the sequel's story and overall execution frankly makes it a tough game to talk about online while avoiding the most toxic quarters of the fandom, many of whom felt they were owed an entirely different game. Though The Last of Us Part 2's gameplay and technical aspects are basically beyond reproach, the how and why of its narrative remains hugely contentious over 5 years later, and likely always will. So, these are the most controversial games of the 2020s so far. Let me know in the comments if I've missed any that would have been perfect here, and maybe we'll do a follow-up. If you want more videos like this though, click one on screen right now, or head over to What Culture Gaming for so many more.